Hello, ladies and gentlemen, this is Zane, and I'm doing a response to the Off the Rope show. Who was better? Was it Mr. T or was it Mike Tyson? Oh damn, I cannot believe they finally came to this one. This was a good debate between the Tasteless one and the Slug Daddy. And I can tell you, this is a very interesting concept here. How do you differentiate two men who helped launch two different eras of the wrestling company that we know as World Wrestling Federation and Entertainment? Sorry for a cat talking. But essentially speaking is this. The most important thing you have to see here is what made this company function. And it comes down to who was the stronger draw. Was it Hogan or was it Stone Cold Steve Austin? I can understand they putting in Shawn Michaels. I can understand Roddy Piper was in the situation as well. Both of them, just like the Slug Daddy talked about, having a triangle. You have both of the top draws at the time, Stone Cold and basically Hogan. Then you have the confrontational person, which is Shawn Michaels and which is Roddy Piper. And then we have the stars. No matter if they're in television or sports, you got Mr. T and you got Mike Tyson. Now, just as the Slug Daddy said, no, it was Tony T had said it, I'm sorry. He said basically no one knew, and I agree with him, I didn't know that basically Mr. T had an amateur wrestling as well as boxing background. He was known for that very rarely, since he was known as being an A-team, and when he made basically Rocky III, no one really realized, and I was one of them, that he actually could box. The one who could not box really was basically Sylvester Stallone. He had to learn how to box by the time he did Rocky I. He had to actually be trained a little bit in knowing how to box. He never did, at least for what I understand. So, seeing it like this, in seeing how the top draws of both eras were, Stone Cold Steve Austin and Hulk Hogan, who was the stronger draw? And I'm going to connect my Flair and Hulk Hogan video to this because this needs to be chimed in this respect. And I may actually, no, I won't connect the video of Chris Jericho and Roddy Piper. I'm not going to connect that one, even though he is involved in this debate. Because when it comes down to it, the top draw is what makes that era work. When it came to Hulk Hogan, and I said in my Flair and Hulk Hogan debate that what made both of these men was their promotions. At the time with NWA, WCW, which was for the NWA Championship, that was Ric Flair. Ric Flair was known in that promotions very well. And he went to what they called at the time next to what WrestleMania was for Vince McMahon. For Ric Flair was Starrcade. Now, I really didn't see much of Starrcade. I did think I saw Starrcade a little bit of 1985. I didn't really remember seeing Starrcade 1984 and 1983. They did exist at the time of when WrestleMania came out and before it. Starrcade existed, ladies and gentlemen. And this is where the question is for the golden age of wrestling. During the time of WrestleMania coming out, Starrcade was in existence. Starrcade 85 came out around the same time as WrestleMania 1 came out. So, essentially speaking, ladies and gentlemen, Starrcade, which was a very good draw, but did not draw as much as WrestleMania, it wiped off Starrcade off the map. This is how basically the golden age of the WWF really went off. Compared when Starrcade was going off, I think, in the late 70s, I think they also had it then, into the early 80s. When WWF was in existence, they had nothing, and I repeat, nothing that compared to Starrcade. They didn't have it. It was a small promotion in Maine. They didn't have any top draws then. They didn't have any, what was the Slug Daddy said, closed circuit television. Back in the 70s and 80s when cable came out, they didn't have pay-per-views back then. They didn't. It was mostly closed circuit. Pay-per-views didn't exist. They had something, I believe, what was it called at the time? I can't remember what it was called. It's been so many years, and I was very young at the time. I forgot the name of it. I'm sorry. It's been a long time. But essentially speaking, on demand, I'm sorry, I believe it was originally called on demand. When you wanted to see something like a boxing match, you had to do something like on demand or something called similar to it to actually see it. They didn't have pay-per-view. They didn't at that time. Pay-per-view didn't really start coming out until the I think early 90s, late 80s. I'm not going to be accurate about it. But essentially speaking, you had on demand. You had to request it. I could be wrong about the name of it, so I'm sorry. But when you compare the two top draws at the time, honestly, when WrestleMania number 1 and number 2 came out, when involving Mr. T, Hulk Hogan had just started WrestleMania in 1984. Really, ladies and gentlemen, having this really shows the difference between a Stone Cold Steve Austin and a Hulk Hogan. And I'm not saying Stone Cold Steve Austin was not an incredibly high draw. He was the second highest draw of that company's history. And you could say at certain times during the month when they had their profits, he might have exceeded maybe once or twice the draw of a Hulk Hogan in their marketing and doing basically the advertising, and when they had their products made, like with their figures, the action figures of a Hulk Hogan compared to a Stone Cold Steve Austin, there's a good possibility a couple of times during the month of a year that Stone Cold could have come close to matching a Hulk Hogan or exceeding him. But I'm not saying he did that constantly. Let's be honest here, ladies and gentlemen. Hulk Hogan has been and always will be known as the top draw of the WWE/WWF, no matter which era you're talking about. He had the highest draw, period. And when it comes to marketing, when it comes to their advertisement, when it comes to their product, even if a Stone Cold Steve Austin came close a couple of months out of a year, a quarter, and had either an equal number or an exceeding number of product and advertising, he didn't beat him. And when it comes to comparing Mr. T to basically a Mike Tyson, this is how you see it. Comparing the draws of Stone Cold and Hogan, because of the beginnings of WrestleMania 1 and 2, you could say that Hulk Hogan made those shows with Mr. T. Obviously, when it came to WrestleMania 14, Stone Cold Steve Austin truly made that with Mr. T. Not Mr. T, Mr. Mike Tyson. Honestly. And I'm not taking nothing away from Mike Tyson. I loved Mike Tyson when I was a kid. Oh, knocking the hell out of several people. It was amazing how he knocked out his opponents. It wasn't like they were even thinking. He just did it. Now the problem here is this, that I see it. Taking away the era time, seen only as WrestleManias without numbers, who is better? Because Mike Tyson only appeared in one WrestleMania, not saying he didn't appear on Raw, not saying he didn't appear on maybe anything else, particularly when he first met Stone Cold Steve Austin. When he first met him, and they had that attack, and where literally Mike Tyson lost a huge wad, and I saw that. He lost a huge wad of money on the ring floor because he got shoved by Stone Cold. I wish I had that money right now, ladies and gentlemen. I wish I had it. It was $1,000. It was hundreds of dollar bills just flew out of his pocket, and his people were picking it up. If you never saw it, Go check YouTube and you can find it. That scene with Mike Tyson meeting Stone Cold Steve Austin with Vincent Kennedy McMahon in that ring. But essentially speaking is this. Mike Tyson was more prominently featured. No, sorry. Not Mike Tyson was more prominently featured. He was featured heavily. That's no joke. But I believe that Mr. T was more prominently featured. I know I said Mike Tyson a second ago, and he was very prominently featured compared to any other celebrity in the history of the WWE/WWF business time. He's the second one that I know of. And I'm not saying they hadn't done it with other celebrities and really hyped them. But honestly, Mike Tyson is the second highest person in the history of that bit of the WWE had been prominently featured on Letterman, on any shows during the 90s. But when it came to Mr. T, he was even more prominently featured. He was. Especially what happened with Rocky 3. I'm telling you right now, ladies and gentlemen, that the Mr. T that we know that said, I pity the fool. Don't even come near me, fool. Compared to Mike Tyson, who's a more very quiet gentleman that will knock the crap out of your head. He will knock your fucking head off your shoulders. Not saying that Mr. T, who we now know, had an amateur background in boxing and in wrestling that probably could knock your head off as well. Mr. T was more flamboyant. Mr. T has been known to be more charismatic. He had a personality that was larger than life. Mike Tyson was not, even though he was known to be a very strong person, that he was like Teddy Roosevelt. Talk softly but carry a big fucking stick. Sorry for the language. But essentially that's how he was. They're contrasting styles. They are. And I believe because of their contrasting styles also, that's what makes Mr. T a lot more prominent. And when it comes to the supporting cast of Piper and Shawn Michaels, honestly, it's almost talking apples and oranges. Because you could say Shawn Michaels was in the same time period as a Roddy Piper. Shawn Michaels obviously was much younger. He was just starting out with the Rockers, and then by the late 80s into early 90s is when he came into his own. And Piper was basically very well seasoned by the late to early, the late to the mid 80s. He was very well seasoned. He'd already spent his time going through the indies in the early to mid 70s. He already was established by the early 80s, particularly when it came to WrestleMania 1. And like I said, we're not doing the numbers here of the WrestleManias. If we just see them as 3 WrestleManias, the one that really was more better was Mr. T. He was in not only 2 WrestleManias, he was with, obviously, the top draw of the company at any era. He was with a supporting cast of Roddy Piper, where he was involved in the 2nd WrestleMania. He was involved and showed more charisma, more in-ring ability, particularly that Mr. Mike Tyson really didn't wrestle. He was a guest enforcer, I believe. And comparing that, where Mr. T actually was in a match twice. And both, he was in a match in 1 WrestleMania, not talking about WrestleMania 1 and 2. He was fighting in both WrestleManias. He had more charisma. He gave more attitude. He made sure he put people over. Mike Tyson wasn't like that. Not saying that he didn't try to hype up his match, being involved in it, knocking out Shawn Michaels, that he was going to take care of business. But you can see that Mr. T did more work. Now, believe me, I am happy as hell that Mike Tyson got into the Hall of Fame. He did. He deserved it. If it wasn't for him, there would never been an Attitude Era push as strong as it was. And just like the Slug Daddy said, in between the time of that WrestleMania 14, WCW was kicking the ass of WWF/E. in the beginning of it, into that WrestleMania, and afterwards. It's obvious. They were getting the ass kicked. And he deserved that respect. We wouldn't have what we have, and I know we're saying, really, how can you really say even the PG era? But obviously, we would still have a PG era. WWF could have gone under like WCW could have, and WCW could have bought out through Ted Turner if this did not work out. This is a scenario I believe could have happened. If the WWF lost the Monday Night Wars, they could have been bought out by Ted Turner well before anything happened with American Online. Clearly, American Online would have never had to have the agreement done if WWE did not beat Ted Turner. I believe he would never need to worry about it. Yes, you can say that Bischoff could have still put the place under because of how it was being run. But if that wasn't an issue, if the WWF had lost the Monday Night Wars, they could have been bought out by Ted Turner. Because that happens in wrestling companies. Sometimes they buy each other out. And we wouldn't have even the watered down, most of the time, piece of crap PG era product that we have now. It's obvious. It would have happened. But let's be honest, the Monday Night Wars, basically WWE won. They won it. That's how they were able to buy out WCW. And Mike Tyson was involved in that, to keep the company from simply going under. He really helped them. And when it comes to this point in the company's future, and I mean it in this respect, the WWF was known as the WWF. We wouldn't have anything if the WrestleManias that we're talking about, 1 and 2, had not happened. Now, like I said, we're trying not to put numbers on this, because you can honestly say, if you don't put numbers on this, which 3 are the most prominently featured WrestleManias? The one with the tag team match with Mr. T, and the one that was the Shawn Michaels and Stone Cold Steve Austin match. Those are the most strongest matches in those 3. The third one with Piper and Mr. T was very important, but it wasn't as important as how these 2 were featured. And I have to say, the first one is a tag team match with Mr. T. It was that important that show go over, and it wasn't because it was the first show in history. You could change to WrestleMania 14 with WrestleMania 1. It would still be better. And I know that Texas Tony T is going to say, are you crazy? The one with Shawn Michaels and the one with Stone Cold Steve Austin, it's a better match. But I'm talking about the show in total. Because you had many people that were there. I believe Tino Santana, who was somewhat hot at the time. You got Hulk Hogan, who's also somewhat hot. Mr. Wonderful, he was wonderful. Paul Orndorff, he was wonderful. We're talking about now the amount of wrestlers and their power along with Mr. T and Hulk Hogan. If you change the positions of these WrestleManias exchange them 1 and 14, the strongest star power is the one with Mr. T involved in that WrestleMania, with every wrestler, because the creme de la creme of wrestlers at the time were in it. I'm not just talking about that one match for each. I'm talking about overall. And you could say that most of those matches during WrestleMania 1, most of them were boring, yes, but also in WrestleMania 14, the same thing. But overall, how many wrestlers were there that gave the most star power? In other words, the most known wrestlers, the most well-groomed wrestlers, the most charismatic, who could tell a story in the ring, who had been known to have good physiques, who had been known to have great mic skills, who had been known to be seen not only in WWF or WWE, but also in WCW, NWA, AWA, and any other promotion, that's WrestleMania 1. So I say Mr. T is the better point, not taking anything away from Mike Tyson, not at all. But when you look at the two matches, number one, and the WrestleManias themselves, the first one and the 14th, which WrestleMania had more polished wrestlers? That was number one. Which WrestleMania had more star power? That was number one, with Mr. T. No matter if you say whatever you want to say, he was more prominently featured on different shows, like basically, I believe he was on the Johnny Carson show at one point before he went off the air. Johnny Carson at the time was a huge deal in the 80s before he retired. I'm telling you right now, Mr. T was more prominently featured. He had more charisma. He was more charismatic, and he wrestled. He was working with not only Hulk Hogan, who was the known strongest star power, but he also worked in that WrestleMania with other people who were known, Tito Santana, Mr. Paul Orndorff, many other wrestlers who were already known in different promotions, who were very well polished, who already had the in-ring ability, already had mic skills, already had the charisma. So that's what I believe. And I hope you like the Zane's View, and I hope you subscribe and comment. If anybody wants to see any of my other videos, particularly ones that were done for the presidential debate, they're on my channel. I hope you like them, and I hope you have a good day.